want to play this clip. This is Max Blumenthal from the Gray Zone. He was asking, he asked the State Department why Tony Blinken and Joe Biden have accused nations of genocide these nations have killed far less than Israel has killed in Gaza in 1 month, and yet it's not being labeled a genocide. Watch this.
In March 2021, Secretary Blinken accused China of the crime of genocide for its alleged treatment of the Uyghur minority, but he didn't accuse them of killing on any mass scale or forcible transfer. Now we see with Israel's military assault on Gaza, something like every 200 people in the Gaza Strip has been eliminated. Over 4,000 children killed. The Ministry of Intelligence, as Sam pointed out, in Israel has published a blueprint for the forced transfer of the entire Palestinian population to Egypt. We have the intent to commit genocide expressed at the highest level of the Israeli government, including Netanyahu himself referring to the Palestinian population as Amalek, the biblical Amalek. So I wonder, when you're accusing one country of genocide without accusing them of mass killing, and then blocking ceasefires to enable another country's military assault, what metric are you using to determine genocide, or is this just political rhetoric?
It's certainly not political rhetoric. The department, and I talked a little bit about this yesterday, we have a rigorous process in place for evaluating whether something constitutes as genocide or not. And that is true in any country that that situation might be being looked at. That is not a term that we have assessed pertains to this current conflict. We are, of course, monitoring the evolving situation and are examining facts as they develop. This continues to be an incredibly challenging and fraught situation, but it's also important to remember that Hamas bears responsibility for sparking this war. They have brought this Project War to Gaza.
Okay, well, President Biden has accused the Russian government of genocide for its actions in Ukraine, where in 2 years it has killed as many civilians as Israel has killed in 1 month in the Gaza Strip. So how do you account for that disparity where you're assisting one country and accusing the other of genocide when the country you're assisting has systematically killed so many more people in 1 month?
Those circumstances are totally and completely not the same, and to make a comparison like that, candidly, is incredibly inappropriate.
That's what they say when they don't have a good answer. That was an inappropriate comparison. How dare you? How dare you, Max Blumenthal? Good for Max for asking that question, for asking those questions. We have evidence of, from at the highest level, Max is right, we have evidence of a document that has been verified coming from the Israeli government talking about the mass expulsion of these Palestinians. That is the definition. And we're going to get into what is the definition of genocide. But when you are trying to get rid of an entire group of people based on their ethnicity or their religion, that is a genocide. And he says, how could you label China? The country labeled China, this was actually Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump's administration, labeled China as committing genocide against the Uyghurs when we saw no mass expulsion of the Uyghurs. There's been no expulsion of Uyghurs. There's been no mass exodus of Uyghurs. We do not see images of Uyghurs marching with their hands up, trying to cross a border. We don't see any of that. Uyghurs were not being starved to death. They were not lacking water or resources. We don't have mass graves like we're seeing in Gaza. Mass numbers of people dying. Then the government changes their definition and says, well, for the Uyghurs, it's not maybe it's not a physical genocide, but it's a cultural genocide, which the definition of genocide does not actually include. So they're saying, well, they were trying to wipe out their culture. They were trying to wipe out their language, their culture, their religion. And China says, yeah, we're trying to wipe out radical Islam. Some of them are practicing radical Islam because they went and fought with ISIS and Taliban and Al-Qaeda, and they came back and they radicalized more people, and we're trying to get rid of radical Islam. Of course, the United States would love nothing more than China to have radical Islamists in their country that they have to battle rather than actually going and doing the Belt and Road Initiative and actually prospering as a country. They'd rather them be battling in a civil war. So, of course, the U.S. government has an ulterior motive on wanting to keep radical Islam inside of China. But nonetheless, the labeling is they're committing genocide when we saw no images like this. We have the internet these days. We're not living in the Stone Ages. We can see if there's an actual genocide happening. We have the ability. We don't need to take anybody's word for it. The government tries to tell us, oh, just believe us. Look at the satellite image of this building, they said about China. You don't see any people. So they say, we swear to you, this building is a concentration camp. You don't have to believe any of that because there's the internet now, and we always end up with the evidence. The evidence always comes out, and we didn't end up seeing any of that when it came to China. We just didn't. Whether you feel, no, you hate China, I get it. You swear they're the worst country on earth and they must have committed a genocide, but you have to believe your own eyes. And if you didn't see the evidence, it probably didn't exist. You've been lied to. Wouldn't be the first time. Then when it comes to Russia, they said that Russia was committing genocide because Russia was going in. There were the battles. The reason why they specifically labeled Russia as committing genocide was they said that they were taking the children and they were taking them into Russia and having them adopted by the Russian families. These children were orphaned. There was a big push by Western countries in Europe to adopt the children. Russia came in, and actually these were Russian-speaking children living in Russian-speaking regions of Ukraine. And these kids were then taken to Russia with people who speak their language, understand their culture, and are similar to them. And they were adopted by those families. And that was labeled a genocide. These are orphaned children. It is a genocide by definition if you forcibly take someone's child from them and you take that child to be raised someplace else, like what happened with Native Americans in this country, where we say, you're savages. We don't think you should raise children. This is, many kind of say this about Palestine. They say this about Hamas. Well, look, they raise them to be violent from birth. So that implies the better thing to do is to take the children from the group and to raise them appropriately, the way that you think that they should be raised. We did that to Native Americans. That is also one of the definitions of genocide. Let's get into the actual definition. This is from the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, okay? They said in their, on 11th of December, 1946, the General Assembly of the United Nations resolved that genocide was a crime under international law. This was approved and ratified as a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide on the 9th of December, 1948. The convention defines genocide as any of the following acts committed with intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group as such by killing members of the group, causing serious bodily or mentally harm to members of the group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. And I want to also say, so we just talked about that, forcibly transferring children of one group to another group. That's how they're getting Russia, saying that Russia was taking these orphaned children, which is not the definition. It would be forcibly transferring. These children had nowhere else to go. The one right before that is imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. People cite China on that. They say, well, they were imposing measures for the Uyghurs, trying to prevent them from having children, and so therefore those measures. Excuse me, to sneeze. My allergies have really been acting up lately. So they're saying, well, because China was telling the Uyghurs that they had to limit how many children they could have, they were preventing that births within that group. If China committed a genocide by telling people they couldn't have children, it was on the Han Chinese population. It was on the majority Chinese population because they told them you could only have one kid. They did that to their entire population. And at that time, they actually said to the Uyghurs, you can still have as many as you want. They didn't put a limit on them when they limited the Han Chinese population. Then they said to the Han Chinese population, you can have 2 kids. They started a 2-child policy. At that time, Uyghurs were still allowed to have as many children as they wanted. Then they enacted a 3-child policy. And at that time, which is what the policy is right now in China, they have now said to the Uyghurs, you as well, you also can only have 3 children. That was then taken, the Uyghurs were told they could only have 3 kids, and that has been taken as they're committing genocide on them because they're limiting their births, failing to mention that that is actually the policy for everybody in China. I believe there are still some ethnic groups that are exempt from that. It depends on the size of the ethnic group in China. If you are a minority ethnic group, they will allow you to have more children. But at this point, the Han Chinese and the Uyghurs are all subject to a 3-child policy. But these other things, killing members of the group, we're of course seeing that now. Israel says we're at war. Okay, so I suppose then maybe that's not under the definition of genocide if it's done under the auspices of war. So maybe you'd have to do it sort of, outside of war. It's something you're doing within your country, even when you're not in war, and then that would be considered genocide. But we see, so it says here, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. We see that happening even not during this war against the Palestinians from the Israelis. The deliberate infliction on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. We have documented evidence that the Israelis would calculate just enough calories for each Gazan to survive and then send that amount in. That was not in wartime. That was before October 7th. That was during peacetime. They were just giving enough for this group to barely survive. A number of specific actions have been deemed to be punishable under the convention. These are genocide, conspiracy to commit genocide. So we have a document from the IDF with the conspiracy to commit genocide. It's not just we think they want to do this. We know they want to, based on a document that was just recently written. A lot of people point to Hamas and the charter for Hamas that was written in 1988. And that charter for Hamas does not call for the destruction of Jews. If you actually read the charter, which nobody does, right? They just take the word for it of people on social media and in the mainstream news. If you actually read the charter, there's definitely inflammatory language that blames Jews all around the world for the situation in Israel. No doubt about that. The charter also says that the only way for Hamas, that they had tried negotiation, that they had done all of these other things, and that according to Hamas, it was futile. There was just no point. And they said the only way to win back our land now is through war, basically. So you've got a charter that says it's Jews who are causing this problem. And then you've got them saying, and the only thing we can do is wage war. And so that then gets into this, their charter says they want to eradicate us from the face of the earth. Well, they want to wage war. However, they did modify their charter in 2017. And the official position of Hamas is that their official position that they've had since 2017 is that their issue is not with the Jews, but with the occupation very specifically. So that has been clarified, and it is with the occupation, and that's who they're fighting. And they say they don't have any problem with Jews; they have a problem with the occupation. Okay. So on the Israeli side, they have a problem with Palestinians. It's not just about they have a problem with Palestinians being there. The Israelis have declared their nation is a nation for Jews. Do they have some Arabs still there? Yes, because those Arabs have been there the entire time and they hadn't left. They weren't expelled during the Nakba. They stuck around and they're still there. They're the laborers, they're the workers, and so Israel says, okay, you can stay and you can have Israeli citizenship, but even in their constitution, which is equivalent to the constitution, their basic laws, it states that the right to national determination is unique to the Jewish people, and that is it. So if you are not Jewish, you are a second-class citizen in Israel. The Palestinians don't have, it's their laws actually, Muslim countries actually in their laws protect Christians and Jews, people of the book. It's part of Islam. And I've been wanting to get an expert on the show to explain this a little bit more in detail. But so the questions, who's trying to commit genocide is kind of constantly coming up. Is it the Israelis trying to commit genocide, or is it Hamas trying to commit genocide, or is no one trying to commit genocide at all? And we're just using this word flippantly, which many people are accusing that. But actually, by definition, this does seem to be truly a genocide by definition of what Israel is doing. The actions need to lead to deaths to be considered to be acts of genocide, causing serious bodily or mental harm, or the deprivation of resources such as clean water, food, shelter, or medical services can be regarded as inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction. We are seeing that happen in real time. There's no disputing it, and Israel don't even deny it. They are denying them water. They're denying them food. They're telling them, take the backpack with your arms up and go. And you have to go to, I don't have a home in the South. I don't have anywhere to go. It doesn't matter. I don't care. Sleep outside. So these are by definition a genocide. The definition that was written up in 1948, saying, so the reason it says that you're cutting them off from clean water, food, shelter, or medical services, inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about physical destruction, causing serious bodily or mental harm, including the infliction of widespread torture, rape, and sexual violence. It is also a criminal offense to plan or incite genocide even before the killing starts. So that would be the document. This recognizes that genocide does not just happen. There's always a path that leads to genocide. Okay. So when it comes to Hamas, even if you believe that the charter, without reading it, if you believe that the charter actually does state that they're looking to genocide Jews, that is not what the charter says. But if you believe that, the charter does have, the old charter, the 1988 charter, does have really inflammatory and violent language. I'm not going to deny that. But genocide, it doesn't call for, we need to be forcibly expelling these people out of here. They're saying, no, we want to have the land back and we want to rule under Palestine. It doesn't say, and then we want, and only Palestinian Arabs can live here, only Muslims can live here. It doesn't say anything about that. In fact, it says opposite of that. The charter says things like people can stay and they're protected, and that they are protected. Their life, their land, their liberty is protected under Islam and under Sharia law, which is the case. So the question then is Hamas who's genocidal? Is it Israel or is it Hamas? Is Hamas truly the genocidal ones? Even if Hamas had that in their charter, even if you believed that, they don't have the capability to pull off genocide against Israel. They have homemade rockets. They're driving around in pickup trucks. They don't have the capability or the infrastructure. You would need military might. You would need the ability to build walls to keep people in a certain ghetto, like what they've done in Gaza and in the West Bank. You would have to have the ability. So you could say, oh, I really want to eradicate this one particular group of people. You could have that mentality. But if you don't even have the means to pull it off, you're not really truly that big of a threat. And there's no way that Hamas, not only could Hamas not genocide all the Jews in Israel, they can't even gain their land back. They're not going to gain their freedom, and they're not going to even gain their land back. They're at such a disadvantage. And what we are seeing right now is that using the excuse of Gazans, that Hamas would commit genocide if they had the opportunity, that statement is being used as an excuse to commit genocide on this group of people. So it's being used as a tool, as an excuse to say, well, if I don't genocide them, they're going to genocide me. So I'm going to do it first. And that is very faulty thinking, especially since, again, it's not actually in their charter. That is just, it's the same conflation we're seeing with Free Palestine marches being conflated as pro-Hamas, or the Palestinian flag being conflated as pro-Hamas. There's this conflation there that is really happening amongst certain groups of people. That is, Israel represents Jews and Jews represent Israel, and that is just not the case. That conflation is faulty and false, inaccurate. The most viscerous voices I know speaking up on behalf of Palestinians are Jews like Max Blumenthal, like Glenn Greenwald, like Dan Cohen, like Katie Halper. There are many Jews who are in support of Palestine. So this is not a monolith, and they're not Israel does not represent all of them by any means.